We're ready to start. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Calabasas City Council, September 28th, 2021, a few minutes after 7 p.m. Tonight, I'm joined by Mayor Pro Tem Maurer, Council members Crouch, Shapiro, and Weintraub, as well as staff. This meeting is being conducted utilizing Zoom teleconferencing. The live stream of the meeting may be viewed on the city's CTV Channel 3 and or online at www.cityofcalabasas.com/CTV Live. If you plan to provide public comment, please press raise hand if you're joining via Zoom or *9 if you're joining via phone, and *6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and the city you live in. You'll be allowed 3 minutes to address the city council regarding any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. In the event a quorum of the city council loses electrical power or suffers an internet connection outage not corrected within 15 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned. Any items noticed as public hearings will be continued to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the city council. Any other items the council has not taken action on will be placed on a future agenda. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by our city attorney, Scott Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. If everyone who's attending the meeting will please rise, place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, Scott. All right. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Crouch,
Aye.
Councilmember Shapiro,
Yes.
Councilmember Weintraub,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maurer,
Yes.
Mayor Bosaja.
Aye.
Carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. All right. Are there any council announcements? Let's turn to, let's see. I see Mary Sue first here.
Sure. I just want to remind the public not to be complacent during this pleasant, cooler weather. These Santa Ana winds are inevitably going to be here at some point through October. Make sure you have an evacuation plan and be prepared to evacuate when asked. Thank you.
Peter?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two things. One, I want to remind everybody also that we are in a drought, and we have been asked to voluntarily reduce our water consumption by 15%. Something to consider is how much water you use in irrigation. That's probably the best and quickest way that we can all save and contribute to solving this problem together. On a lighter note, I also want to announce that the Calabasas Film Festival begins tomorrow night. You can check out more of the films that are going to be shown and buy tickets to the event at calabasasfilmfestival.com.
Okay, David?
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know we have our annual flu clinic this Saturday, October 2nd at Founders Hall, like we do each year. So please go online and find all the information and come get your flu shot. We are still obviously dealing with COVID, and we will be for some time. And that is something we all want to be wary of. And if you're not vaccinated, I urge you to get vaccinated to be safe. But the flu clinic is something that is important and for each of us, so we do not start with a large amount of flu in our city as well. Also want to let everybody know I attended the revival of the Calabasas Segura High annual Cup football game this year. It's been 3 years off since we've held the Cup for a number of years. This year, Agura was good enough to win the Cup. Next year, the game will be at Calabasas, and I'm sure we'll bring that back to Calabasas. And I want to congratulate, speaking of Calabasas High, the National Merit Scholars from Calabasas High School. We'll have a list soon, and I'm sure we'll put that information out, or the district will. Thank you.
Okay, Alicia?
I just wanted to remind everybody that it's really important that in terms of public safety, if you see something, say something. It's really simple, but just a reminder to call the sheriff's station for something that you feel might be a public safety issue. And their number again is 818-878-1808. With more people returning to work and beginning to travel, just really important to keep an eye on your neighborhood, connect with your neighbors, and always make sure your doors are locked. When people do go on vacation, you can call the sheriff's station for a vacation check, where they will come and check the perimeter of your property. So just something to keep in mind, but really important to connect with your neighbors, know what's happening on your block, and report things that seem out of the ordinary. Thank you.
Okay. And my announcement is that next week on Wednesday, October 6th at 7 p.m. at the Calabasas High School Performing Arts Center, I'll be giving the annual mayor's address, State of the City, and it's open to the public. Please attend if you wish, and it will be rebroadcast on CTV over the next month. Okay, now we've reached our time where it's time for oral communications and public comment. This is for items not on the agenda. So in other words, anything not on the agenda, if you wish to speak on it, would have to be 3 minutes or less, and it has to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. At this time, if you're attending, please use the raise hand function so that we know you want to speak, and I'll call you by the name that's listed here. Some of you have nicknames or just phone numbers or whatever, or initials, so we'll do our best. So now's the time, and once we pass this, we were not going to accept additional comments. So I see so far one comment, and we'll call in Gavin Lipschitz. If you would state your, well, I'm assuming it's Gavin Lipschitz, but if that's not your name, if it's someone else in the household, just tell us your name and where you live.
Okay, this is Gavin Lipschitz. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Gavin Lipschitz. I live on Dardine Street in Calabasas. And thank you for allowing me to speak today in the open session. I love this city and the community, as do many other people. And I know that it does not happen, that good things do not happen without the work of the city council, the city management, and people who participate. And it was in that spirit that I am addressing today, to say that as someone in the community, a citizen in the community, there are some concerns that I'm having regarding, as to others, about the tennis and swim center. We've addressed it a little bit in some communication via email, but I realize if we want to make a difference, I need to stand up, speak, and participate. That's the only way things will ever happen if we want to keep it the great city that it is. The things that we are experiencing, and I'll repeat some of it. I know the time is short because I don't know what people are aware of. The situation, once the COVID restrictions were lifted, the tennis and swim center hours were never reinstated to 10 p.m. And that's a problem for a lot of people. The majority of people, or many of the people, I should say, who work are not able to play. And they generally would play at 7:30 p.m. All the leagues, official and unofficial, tended to be at 7:30 so that people could play all the way through to 10 p.m. That hasn't happened, so people have been unable to play. That's the first fold, and I'd like that to be changed. Time is short, so there's a second issue, which is kind of almost a bigger issue that is impacting it. Right now, the city is dependent on the membership dues, as well as the dues that come from Top Seed, and they each bring in about 50% of the revenue. The challenge that is going on is that Top Seed are booking up courts, and many people will speak to it about it. They book up courts. Like the other day, 6 courts were booked up and not used. They weren't using them. They were not used. So people could not schedule any tennis. And it's happened a number of occasions. It's happened to me 3 times in the last 3 weeks and happened to a lot of other people. So these are issues that I would like to be addressed. I wish there was more time, and hopefully this can be considered to be put on an agenda for a future meeting if it can't be resolved prior to that, because it was changed. It was changed without any input. And I think that the community needs to.
Okay, thank you. There's a clock up there. We are going to be strict with time because we have a rather lengthy meeting. I see another hand up, Norman Dornfest. Hello, Norman. You're muted. Norman, can you?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, City Council members. I just wanted to piggyback off what Gavin had said and add that many of the tennis players have talked among themselves, and they, I believe, provided a petition of over 100 members that are expressing what Gavin expressed about the tennis hours being cut from 10 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then it condenses the prime time, which is when people can play. So then those hours get overbooked, and it's very hard to get reservations. And then historically, people would book times, as Gavin said, like at 7:30, and they would play until they finished. So they might have booked a court for an hour, but they would keep playing. So it might not be clear that it was fully used, but it was, I can definitely say. And it's nothing like you're in the middle of a game and they close the game before you're finished. And I've been a member for many years, so this is just like one step of it seems like a slow decline. And I know that Calabasas wants to be on the cutting edge of things. So at one time, for instance, they had a clay court, which was very unique. They don't have a clay court anymore. And at one time you could get ball machine reservations throughout the day. And those hours have been limited and very hard to get reservations. And the same type of ball machine is being used as was used many years ago. So people are using their own ball machines. So it would be nice if the city council could just look at maybe the tennis center, maybe the whole center, what people use. I know there's the tennis players, there's the people who use the swimming pool and the gym, and just, keep things up to date and in good condition. So thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Okay, I see no other hands up. Would anyone else like to speak in public comment before I close it? Okay, I see one other hand's gone up. Oh, a couple other hands. Okay, so we'll bring in next Joni Carlson. Please state your name and city of residence.
Hi, I'm Joni Carlson, and I live in West Hills, but I am a member of the Calabasas Tennis and Swim. And I think just to wrap it all up, everybody's frustrated. A lot of people have kids that they have to feed and do homework with, and then we don't get to play because you close too early. Then we have the problem with the fact that I make reservations. You have to make it 2 days before, and they're already gone. All the courts are gone for 6 o'clock at night to play right now. So that somebody should look into. As for the top seed, the problem is really the pros just don't give the court up. When their client cancels, they don't give the court up. And the people at the front desk don't give a pro's court up, which we all understand, But if nobody's on that court, it should be released and be able to, for a member to play. So that's it. That's all I got to say. I just think everybody has to take a look into this, and it should be reverted back to 10 o'clock. Also, we get the answer of saying that everybody's trying to be COVID safe. We're the safest state in the country, and we're outside playing. So it's not like we're inside or gathering. We're outside. So I hope you take it serious and take a look into all of this. Thank you.
Okay, Mari, you're back, right? Mari, I mean, you're okay now?
I'm okay. I'm back.
You got
Thank
bounced
you.
out. Okay.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you.
Let's bring in Linda Beiswanger.
Hi, guys. I'll just also speak real quickly, but I'm at a loss as to understanding why that we can't go back to the hours. And I really appreciate your guys' time here and the emails back and forth. And I know that there's been, it seemed maybe that there was a little bit of snarkiness or frustration, but it was only because we really honestly felt like we weren't being heard at all. And then they look at the last 3 years to see really what the average is, but it's not, it doesn't look like there was a large percentage playing that late, and that's just not true. So then, we just really started getting frustrated. I see that the email just went out about 20 minutes or within the last hour about the change in the time from 6 a.m. to 9, which is great, but we're hoping that you can extend it to the normal hours of 10 and Saturday. I'm at a loss why we're not open at 7 a.m. like we used to be, so that people can, start their day at 7 a.m. on the weekends like we used to be able to do. So that's it. I'm hopeful and I know there's a couple tennis players on the board, so I know you guys understand where we're coming from, and we really do appreciate your time though. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Is there anybody else who would like to speak in public comment? All right, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to close public comment and go on to
Mayor Bazagian, if I could, while there are some speakers still present, and I will not be addressing them, but I did want to let them know that I will be asking that we have a future agenda item, just kind of an overall perspective on operations at the Tennyson Swim Center. I can't remember the last time we've had a briefing on that scale, and look at some of the issues that we've been hearing about, and we'll have some of that data in, but so I just want to let the public know that I will be asking that this be put on a future agenda.
And maybe Kendon can, I know he has probably some comments he can make during the city manager's report. We can't do it now. All right. I'm moving on to consent. We have items 1 through 4. Would anybody like to take any of these items off? Mary Sue, did you?
I just have a quick comment about 4. I wanted to be sure that staff added the COG map with the letter.
Okay. Anyone else want to take an item off? Anybody in the audience who would like to speak on consent items 1 through 4, please raise your hand at this time. Any calls, Mari?
No, Mr. Mayor, there's no
Okay.
calls and no hands.
Then we're going to vote. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as is?
So moved.
I'll
Seconded.
that.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Kraut,
Aye.
Councilmember Shapiro,
Yes.
Councilmember Weintraub,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Mauer,
Aye.
Mayor Bosajian.
Aye.
Carries 5-0, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move to the public hearing. This is a public hearing for consideration of the following matter. Consideration of City Council Resolution number 2021-1750 to 1, certify the final environmental impact report or EIR, and 2, adopt the 2021-2029 housing element update and associated land use element updates to the Calabasas 2030 general plan, consistent with statutory requirements of California housing element law. And 3, consideration of ordinance number 2021-395, amending Title 17 of the Calabasas Municipal CMC Code, Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, and associated development standards for qualifying housing development projects, amending other sections within Title 17 of the CMC as necessary to be consistent with the added new sections, and updating the official zoning map, all as necessary to conform with the general plan housing element and related updates. At their September 13th, 2021 public hearing, the Planning Commission recommended to the City Council certification of the final EIR, adoption of the 2021-2029 housing element update, and associated updates to the land use element, and adoption of ordinance number 2021-395. Pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, an environmental impact report, EIR, has been prepared and circulated in compliance with CEQA and the CEQA guidelines. Has the proof of posting and publication been filed for this public hearing?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we received correspondence and it was distributed and posted.
The public hearing is now open. Are there any changes or additions to the staff report? Well, actually, I'm going to just have, who do we have here? I see Tom Bartlett, Michael Klein. Hi. So Michael, are you giving the staff report? Tom is, okay.
Mr. Mayor, it will be myself and several others. We have some consultants that we have used for the housing element and for the environmental impact report who will share the presentation with me.
Okay, are we gonna, Mari, are we gonna see these people or is it just a screen with their name on it?
You will see them if they're speaking, Mr. Mayor, or
Okay.
they can turn on their camera if you wish.
Okay, well, when they're speaking, it'd be helpful if they turn on their camera. Also, Tom, Michael, whoever, there's so many like appendices and books and stuff. If you're referring to something, please let us know which appendix it is and where. That would be very helpful.
Certainly.
So Tom, I guess you're going to start.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council. As I mentioned, we have some others besides myself who are going to join in the presentation. I'd like to just mention who they are to start. Karen Warner Associates is part of our team. She prepared the housing element update. We also have Rincon Consultants. A number of individuals who are with that firm will be available to answer questions and will speak briefly on the environmental impact report. So to kick it off, I just want to do a little bit of review. First, with the Planning Commission action that occurred 2 weeks ago, they held their hearing. We provided them with a detailed analysis and discussion of the state requirements and our approach to meeting those requirements. That draft of the housing element and the EIR was reviewed and discussed by the commission. They accepted public testimony, which was provided both in writing and in person. And then following their hearing, they voted unanimously, to recommend approval of the housing element and certification of the EIR. Excuse me, I do have a little bit of a frog in my throat, so bear with me.
Excuse me, Tom. Tom, could you
Yes.
kindly maximize full screen the presentation? As I'm concerned when we get to the map sections, it might not be very readable unless this is as large as it goes. Thank you.
All right, yeah, Michael Klein's doing the screen share. So we're dividing and conquering that way. Okay, so
I have it as large as it can go.
I told the planning commissioners that I felt this is the most important slide, and I still think it is. What we're doing now is basically because of what the state has mandated us to do. We are required to update this housing element again. This is my fourth opportunity to do so in my career in California. And under the state laws, we also have to do some other updates that are triggered by that, including an update to the land use element, which is part of what's under consideration this evening, as well as updates to the circulation and safety elements. Those will be forthcoming. We're well underway with those and would expect to have them before you in 3 to 6 months. The EIR covers everything. We've already anticipated those aspects. So in terms of the housing element update, next slide. I'm sorry, the land use element update. Next slide, please, Michael. It's also triggered by state law under a couple other aspects that require incorporation of some environmental justice components. So our updates address that in the land use element, as well as an updated land use map and some charts and figures. We have updated goals, policies, and programs regarding the proposed affordable housing overlay. And then, as I mentioned, the environmental justice, but also fair housing. So I'd point out page 2, Roman numeral 2-8 of attachment C of the staff report relative to those items. There are also a few error corrections within that document. We can't help it if we find an error while we're working on this, we want to fix them. So in terms of our background, just to remind people, I like to remind those who might be watching what Calabasas already has. This is the housing units in place today, or at least as of earlier this year. Roughly 6,900 single-family homes, a little over 2,000 multifamily, and 231 mobile homes. This is how they break out. Of those, 87 units are affordable units, just about 1%. So in the last 2 cycles of our housing element updates, what are known as the 4th and 5th RHNA cycles, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, this is what the production has been in Calabasas. And you can see the total units and the affordable units. I mentioned the previous slide, we had 87 affordable units. This number shows 98. And so anybody who's wondering, well, wait a minute, if we produce 98, well, this is because we're assuming that perhaps half of our ADUs would at least fall within an affordable category. Obviously, if you subtract that from 98, that's the 87. So all 87 of our affordable units have been produced since 2011.
Tom, before you move on that slide, just one quick correction, or maybe it should be a footnote. The Horizons was in 2012. That was when it was dedicated. As I recall, the reason why they don't have affordable units is because the entitlements were actually given before our ordinance kicked in requiring affordable units.
They had been entitled, you're right,
So
before
I
our
think,
inclusionary ordinance took effect.
so I think someone getting confused with that might, in the future, if we could have a little footnote, because there was a huge lag in between the entitlements and the building of it. I wouldn't want someone to think that we didn't address that requirement.
We could certainly note that. Thank you. So Karen Warner is going to take over at this point to talk about our planning aspect for housing in the future.
Okay, Karen, just introduce yourself and welcome again.
Thank you.
One of these days, one of us isn't going to be here, but I think over 20 years, I think, right?
It's been a while, that's for sure.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Karen Warner with Karen Warner Associates, and I've worked with Calabasas on many housing elements and several different special housing projects. This is the culmination of over a year worth of work. Staff has been fantastic. This has been a very high bar. The requirements at the state level are much more intensive on the 6th cycle housing element than the 5th cycle and the 4th cycle, frankly. So we've really had to do a lot of extra on this go around. Just wanted to start out just highlighting what the major goals are of the city's housing element. The city's goal is to preserve its existing housing stock, to eliminate any barriers for housing development, to provide incentives for the production of affordable housing, to provide adequate sites to meet your regional housing needs, and to provide equal housing opportunity for special needs populations. Next slide. So the city's current 5th cycle housing element was, you had a RHNA of 330 total units, including 199 affordable units. We were able to accommodate all of the RHNA within your existing general plan designation. So you really set yourself up well for your future, your RHNA needs in the 5th cycle. And the element was approved by the state. Next slide. This current 6th cycle housing element, as I mentioned, has a series of new laws and requirements. For example, we're required to evaluate local ordinances that impact the cost and supply of residential development. The site inventory must be maintained throughout the planning period, so there is no net loss. So essentially what that means is, as housing element sites are developed, if they're developed with either fewer units or to a lesser affordability than we've assumed in the sites inventory, we need to make sure you have enough extra sites buffer to still be able to meet your RENA. So that's why we have additional sites beyond what your RENA minimum is. And every time the city approves a project on a housing element site, it will need to make this no net loss finding. The sites inventory needs to include properties that are realistically available and capable of supporting new development. And because more than half of your sites are on non-vacant land, we have to have substantial evidence that the existing use is likely to redevelop during the 8-year planning period. And then there's one of the many, many attachments is this new requirement that's the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is, it's very interesting, it's very involved. It's like a mini housing element in itself, but that was, a whole new requirement that the state was just coming up with guidelines for as we were working through the element. Next slide. We had extensive community involvement opportunities throughout the preparation of the element. There was an online community survey. The city had over 900 respondents, which is just tremendous. We did a specific survey for seniors as one of your more vulnerable populations, and you had over 300 responses. We had a community workshop, study sessions between the Planning Commission and Council, and a really nice dedicated website with information continually updated on public input. Next slide. The RENA, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. This is the requirement under state law that jurisdictions provide for their fair share of housing growth. The numbers come down from the state. They are allocated to SCAG. SCAG then allocates them to the jurisdictions. Calabasas was successful early on in getting a more reasonable allocation because of its various constraints. There was an adjustment, a social equity adjustment for communities that have a higher income population than the region as a whole. And so that's why you have a higher percentage of very low and low income units in your RENA than the standard for the region as a whole. Next slide. So this is